I have a theory that music is dead. As someone who spent their entire life in and around music, it's not like I get any pleasure in saying this. I know this may sound like a hot take or an exaggeration or like I'm just being a hater, which is all maybe true to some extent, but I promise there's more to the story here. I've put a lot of time and research into this, and while it's maybe unfair to say that music is totally dead, it's definitely dying. And by that I mean its role as a dominant cultural force is fading fast. It's easy to blame Spotify, AI, algorithms, and you'll see plenty of articles out there doing that. But the story I'm getting at is much bigger here. I'm talking about a decades-long relationship between the music industry and the tech industry, and whether music as an art form can survive while being stuck in the middle. And while I'll admit the predictions I'm laying out here may feel pretty bleak, there's some silver linings we'll explore in the back half that may at least help soften the blow a little bit. Hi, I'm MK, welcome to my world. Let's fucking do this. So when I say that music is dying, it's not that nobody's listening to music anymore. We obviously are. 2024 was actually one of the music industry's best years on record. US streaming subscriptions hit an all-time high of 99 million. For the first time ever, Spotify actually turned a profit, netting 1.5 billion. Go capitalism. And in the concert industry, Taylor Swift's Eras Tour became the biggest tour ever, bringing in over $2 billion, which is nearly double the previous record held by Coldplay. While these numbers are impressive, all they tell me is that the music industry is doing well, especially big players like Spotify and Live Nation that have embedded themselves at its core. So I used to think that Matty Healy of the 1975 was pretty annoying, a bit of an edgelord on Twitter, and I didn't really take him seriously, but somehow I've stumbled into some interviews with him recently, and he's actually pretty thoughtful about music as an art form. And he had this quote recently that I really appreciated. There's a big market of music for people who don't like music. That could mean they like the spectacle of big concerts, they like the background noise offered by Spotify, or they like the clout associated with liking the right artists or the right bands. So to Maddie's point, I'm not really interested in the success of music made for the music industry. I'm interested in the future of music as an art form. And that's where the numbers and the reality really start to diverge. My Twitter feed is obviously its own little bubble, but I've seen more and more takes concerned about the current state of music and where it's headed. Asking things like where did all the good music go may feel a little out of touch, but these tweets are getting at some underlying truths about the industry that I think are worth unpacking. This one was pretty funny and maybe a little too close to home. Not that I personally am doing ketamine and writing poetry, but it's definitely a vibe. Music is basically a dead medium right now. No one is searching for new artists they like anymore. People in New York don't start bands. They write meme poetry about ketamine and sex. This one's a little more subtle and gets more at the underlying issues I want to explore further here. Music, which used to feel like the engine of entire movements, does seem quieter now. It's like the spark that used to ignite subcultures has been dimmed by endless scrolling, where identity gets built around fragmented memes and niche aesthetics instead of shared sounds. But with all the record-breaking money pouring into music, you'd expect a lot of experimentation and innovation, right? New artists challenging existing norms, new genres changing our perceptions of what music can be, and most importantly, new listeners chasing down these new trends and eating them up. And while we've seen a few niche subgenres like hyperpop spring up and gain attention, there's been nothing as impactful recently as the emergence of trap in the early 2000s, or Sophie taking over the 2010s. Right now, there's no single artist or sound that's really grabbing us and reshaping the landscape like previous movements have. I do a lot of digging for new music, and I have yet to find the next Ye or Sophie that's going to change the way we think about music and lead us in a new direction. I think the hard truth is that music just isn't evolving at the same pace or frequency that it was 5, 10, even 50 years ago. As a result, music's role as a cultural magnet, its ability to unite people, spark movements, shape identities, all those things seem to be fading really fast. And as much as I hate to say it, I'm not sure it's ever going to bounce back. Like I said, it's not like there's no more good music being made anymore. Artists like McGee, Tintin Binja, DJ Suzy, A.G. Cook, they've all put out great records in the past year or so. What I am saying is that music feels stuck. It's no longer reinventing itself as an art form. I'm well aware that's common for older generations, especially people in their 30s that are just aging out of being hip, to hate on music coming out from the youth. But there's something distinct about this current moment in time that makes haters like me stand out from our hating forefathers. As previous generations have aged out of the zeitgeist, they've hated new music because it was too new, too unrecognizable, too hard to reconcile with their understanding of what made good music when they were growing up. Imagine the difference between someone growing up on the Beatles versus Run DMC. The fundamental sounds, structures, philosophies that guide those two artists is so different as to make them sound like they're from totally different planets. It's very reasonable for those two different people to not get each other. The complaint I'm raising now is different. It's not that new music feels too new, but that it feels shockingly familiar. To illustrate this, I challenge you to name 5 artists from last year that sound like the year 2024. You could say Charlie XCX, Sabrina Carpenter, or some other TikTok song that blew up. And while it's true that those things may be emblematic of a moment, we all remember Brat Summer, they're not emblematic of a time. So let me explain the difference. Charlie's Brat was largely an extension of a sound she's been building on for years as part of the broader PC music movement. If you placed any track from Brat on one of her releases 5 to 10 years ago, for the most part, it'd sound right at home. It's still a great record. I'm not trying to knock it. But the point is that the music is not distinct to the period in which it was released. Compare this to if I asked you to name 5 artists that sound like the year 1999. You could name not just a variety of artists, but a variety of genres that were making waves with new sounds and new approaches. Just to name a few examples: Britney Spears' Baby One More Time, Blink-182 Enema of the State, TLC Fan Mail, Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication, Dr. Dre 2001, all came out in 1999. If I were to play you any track from any one of those releases today, you could easily identify it as specific to that scene and that era. They don't sound exactly like the music that came before, and they don't sound exactly like the music that came after. Their art belongs to a specific time and a specific place. Now imagine if you were a teen in 1999, which I am not quite that old. The connection of the music that was on the radio to the specific time that you occupied made it feel exciting, immediate, and urgent. These were artists that weren't just reflecting the present. They were giving you a creative blueprint of values, philosophies, and experiments that you could use to get involved and help shape what was next. Music was an igniting force and an activating energy. Sure, it brought rockstar wealth, but it was also the pinnacle of cultural influence. Music was where creativity happened and was rewarded, both culturally and financially. So what happened? When did music lose its role as a cultural anchor? How did it lose its sense of time and place? So I know you may want to push back at this point and say, hey, music still matters, it still makes a difference. And trust me, I get it, I'm with you. But I think if you take a step back with me and look at the broader context and trends, you'll see that you are probably increasingly an exception to the rule. So if you're already familiar with the work of Mark Fisher, some of these ideas may feel a little bit familiar. He did a lot of writing 10 to 15 years ago about the state of music then, feeling that there was a lack of innovation. He was concerned about where it was headed. Unfortunately, things have only gotten worse since then. So the goal here is to expand on some of his theories and understand how the decline of music has only accelerated in recent years and try and get an idea of where we're headed. So as I mentioned at the top, core to the decline of music is the rise of technology. Artists' relationship to music has always been mediated by technology, and it used to be that this was actually a generally positive and productive relationship. First, the raucousness of the electric guitar enabled the birth of rock and roll. Then, the precision and programmability of the synth enabled the birth of new wave into the 80s. Then it became the flexibility and mathematics built into digital audio software like Ableton and Pro Tools that laid the foundation for rap beats and electronic dance music that dominated into the early 2000s. Overall, the story of 20th century music is that these new tech-enabled creation tools brought new capabilities and constraints that shaped the sound of popular music. While tech tools for creation were constantly changing, tech for distributing music remained mostly the same. First you bought records, then you bought tapes, then you bought CDs. While it's true these physical mediums were slightly different, we all know those vinyl heads that love like the crackle or whatever, but the core mechanisms through which audience and artists connected were mostly the same. Whenever you wanted the latest release, you went to a physical store and bought whatever physical medium was available for distributing music at that time. In order to capture the hearts and minds of listeners, technology for creativity was necessary to make art that was new enough to convince you to get in a car, drive to a store, and shell out $20 for a single release. In other words, art's merit was measured in novelty. Everything changed with the birth of the internet. Technology began to untether those physical constraints that had guided distribution up to that point in time. Selling physical products at physical stores was a cost-intensive process. It required paying for real estate, manufacturing goods, and shipping them all around the world. Physical distribution also limited your audience size to whoever lived near a store, was able to drive to it, and was willing to pay for a premium product. The internet turned anyone with a computer into a potential buyer and brought the cost of distribution down to zero. This is what began to totally upend traditional incentives for investing in music technology. Instead of catering towards those music nerds that were willing to shell out hundreds of dollars a year for new music that excited them, record companies realized they could make more money by selling music at a low cost to the lowest common denominator listener. I'll never forget my friend's mom downloading every Enya song and blasting it during carpool. Shout out Enya. Anyway, it was much easier to convince 1,000 moms to buy a Pleasant track for 99 cents than it was to convince thousands of teens to save up money for a trip to the record store. So that meant for anyone working in the music industry, accessibility overtook creativity as the value that drove music sales. So that's where tech investments started to flow. Streaming and social media, new means of connecting artists and fans directly, started to soak up all the money in the room. With all this focus on technology for distribution, there was less money available to continue investing in new tools for music creation. You could argue that the last meaningful technological shift for music creation was auto-tune, which caught on after Cher's Believe in 1998. This has meant for the most part that nothing about the way that artists make music has fundamentally changed in the last 20 to 30 years. Stuck with approximately the same tools as artists from a previous generation, this explains why music today has started to sound less and less distinct. This shift in investment from tools for creativity to tools for distribution has also shaped our individual relationships to music. How we discover music, talk about music, and judge its worth has been totally turned upside down. Discovering new art used to be a time-intensive process that required intention. You went out and searched for new music, getting recommendations from friends, reading independent music blogs, going to shows and seeing who's playing. Now, streaming and social media have removed all that agency and intentionality from the music discovery process. Today's teens are served up an endless stream of recommendations directly to their phones via Spotify and TikTok. Without these recommendations, they don't even know where to look for new music. This has transformed the music discovery process from an arduous search for hidden gems to a passive scroll through abundant, disposable content. There are still fans out there that are willing to do the digging to find experimental stuff, but the cultural incentives to do so have eroded. There are no more large, trustworthy music blogs to affirm that your taste in music is cool. There's no more need to talk to your friend's hip older sibling to see what they're into. And so there's no longer cultural clout to be gained by liking the edgy, esoteric, and underground. Instead, the way you level up is by attaching yourself to whatever's popular. A track name on Spotify is overshadowed by the play count that sits beside it, and an album's worth is determined by the number of people talking about it online. In other words, with the dominance of tech-first mediums for discovering new music, we've developed tech-first means for valuing it. Listeners can now look at play counts and Instagram followers as a proxy for what's cool, what's relevant, and what they can use to elevate their social status. On the flip side, tech interfaces now also tell us which art isn't worth listening to. To paraphrase another recent interview from Maddie Healy, the best art tends to come from a band you don't like on your first listen. This means it's music that doesn't fit neatly into existing paradigms you're already familiar with. It's new, it's challenging, and it might take a few listens to get it. The problem is, the same low play count for a track could signal that it's experimental and fresh, or that it's bad. In our haste to consume, because music is now ever present and ever accessible, we tend to assume the latter, that it's bad. So any artist trying to do something different, something that isn't immediately recognizable, is most likely to be ignored. Because platforms tend to reward familiarity over creativity, risk-taking has become a huge liability. This is why the art that succeeds today is typically the most dumbed-down version of what's possible with today's generation-old tools. This tech-driven shift in cultural values from the avant-garde to the algorithm has crushed the market for both listeners and creators of experimental music. And if you personally don't think that experimental music matters, wait to see what happens to pop music over the next 5 to 10 years. When there's no more Sophie or Yeezus for pop artists to borrow from, even the most mainstream listeners may recognize how stale most music has become. These systemic forces that are crushing the art of music have become so strong and so entrenched that I really don't know how music breaks out of these headwinds and regains its position as a preeminent cultural institution. The same way salons of the 1900s were dominated by discussions of painters and writers until film took over, tech is driving a devaluation of music that's about to radically shake up how we define creativity and where we look for it. To be clear, I know that humans have always made music and we will continue to make music. I just think that the real art, the stuff that pushes boundaries and pushes the medium forward, will increasingly be confined to basements and niche online communities supported by a handful of true believers. Meanwhile, Spotify slop and other tech-first media are going to be taking over as dominant drivers of culture. There are people out there still fighting to change that, space makers like Tony Lashley with Marine Snow, who are building new cultural institutions that try to recenter music's value, but I think even they would admit they're fighting a huge uphill battle. As a music lover, I hope all of those projects succeed, or maybe some of these wacky AI tools will actually save the day by reshaping how we make music all over again, but I can't say that I'm holding my breath. Meanwhile, there's an entire generation of kids out there that's sitting on a well of untapped creative energy that's looking for an outlet and an inspiration. While it's not totally scientific, I think it's useful to look at the Google Trends data. You can see from this chart that interest in becoming a musician peaked around the 2010s and has generally trended downward since then. If you're a teenager today and you're looking to be creative and get paid for it, music is no longer at the top of your list. So all that creative energy that once fueled garage bands and bedroom producers needs a new home. The question is, where's it going to go? As we all know, a lot of this latent creative energy has gone towards creating content, but that only appeals to a certain type of person. Again, more Google Trends data suggests that in the past few years, we've reached peak influencer. So while I'm sure there's still plenty of people out there trying to become a TikToker or Instagram influencer, we're seeing this gap emerge and the energy start to shift somewhere else. For those that are less comfortable in front of a camera, startups are the new rock stars that are capturing teenage dreams of wealth and fame. They're looking up to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk more than they are Jay-Z, Beyonce, Ye, the music moguls that once defined creative ambition. So this chart is pretty insane. Where we're seeing a decline in interest in becoming an influencer or a musician, there's never been more interest in learning to code, and we can see that in the culture. So instead of forming bands or recording EPs, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are increasingly going to hackathons. Instead of organizing basement shows or freestyling with their friends, they're launching Discord servers. In other words, startups are the new bands. This shift makes total sense. Music is oversaturated, underpaid, and declining in cultural status. On the other hand, technology still feels like a new open frontier. There's money, momentum, and actual encouragement to build something new. Now, I know if you're an art lover, this may be starting to sound like a pretty bleak picture of the future. A world that's full of knockoff Nikita beers isn't one that I'm super excited about either. But there is one silver lining that I want to spend the rest of the video exploring. As the next generation trades bedroom pop for the App Store, we're seeing more and more new tech products that are made not just to maximize revenue, but as a form of self-expression. This is a new creative movement that merges art and technology into something that I call sentimental software. Sentimental software is technology with a creative soul. This means tech products that are imbued with the unique emotions, perspectives, and personalities of their creators. I'm not just talking about good design. Good design has been around for a long time and typically just describes an empty aesthetic more than it does a container for real emotions. I'm also not talking about pure net art, which is things you might see in museums or galleries where the internet is used purely as an artistic tool. I'll go over some specific examples in just a minute, but first I want to look at video games as a bit of a proxy. Long before the App Store came around, video games were the first to prove that technology could be both art and interface. More recent titles like The Last of Us, Journey, or Hollow Knight don't just entertain, they create deeply personal, interactive experiences. This is why for many, video games have already eclipsed the role of long-form content traditionally reserved for TV and film. For a generation of iPad kids raised on interactivity, watching a movie is starting to feel increasingly outdated. Gaming offers a level of personalized engagement that film never can. If you're a movie lover like me that thinks this is just a provocative prediction, it's already happened. Video games generated $50 billion in revenue last year compared to just $8 billion in box office revenue. Now I know this isn't an exact one-for-one, since you have to leave your couch to go to the movies. It also doesn't account for video streaming, which is a huge category, but hard to measure when people are actually watching something or just have it on in the background. Based on the available data, I'd be willing to bet that focused attention on video games in 2024 was still a lot higher than focused attention on film. So if video games are the new movies, then apps are going to be the new songs. I totally understand it may sound absurd to say technology is going to replace music like this. I'm not saying that it's an exact one-for-one where we'll go from saying, hey, check out this new song I found to, hey, check out this note-taking app that makes me feel things. But I'm not 100% not saying that. The point is, in our increasingly tech-first world, creative expression is going to have to evolve. While music has long been that cultural mirror reflecting collective emotions and individual identities, it's a medium that no longer aligns with the way that creative experiences are delivered, via personalized screens. So with Sentimental software, there's this new wave of indie developers and designers that are approaching the creation of tech products in the same way a great artist might approach making music, as a deeply emotional and personal art form. Unlike video games, you don't need these big studio budgets to make something happen. All you need is a determined person with an idea and a laptop to create something totally new. And just like a song you find on Spotify, these artful apps can be immediate, personal, and always accessible. Unlike with music, there's a lot of money being poured into developing new tools for software creation. This is what's fueling this fresh wave of new creators creating new experiences. This democratization of both creation and consumption mirrors that DIY ethos that fueled so many of music's greatest scenes. I'm expecting an explosion of creativity just like when GarageBand came out on Macs. It empowered millions of new people to experiment with creating music. Okay, so what exactly do I mean by sentimental software? What does it look like in practice? Let's see some examples. For me, nobody embodies the spirit of sentimental software more than artist-designer Sam Pites. His hand-scribbled Run app feels like a love letter to playful physical movement. His Memory Garden offers a uniquely intimate approach to journaling that combines both photos with handwritten notes. These are both just demo app experiences that have blown up online, but he actually just launched his full app 1 year, which is a great reminder to acknowledge both the ephemerality and beauty of daily life. It really speaks to his unique style and experience, and I expect we'll see a lot more cool experiments from him to come. Then there's Andy Allen with Not Boring Software Company. The apps he's building there are simple utility apps that feel like art, turning things like timers and habit trackers into playful, expressive experiences. These types of experiences radiate the emotional energy of the individuals that made them, just like a band can have a signature sound or a singer an iconic voice. And just like a happy song can put you in a good mood or a loud song can get you hype, these thoughtful designs can evoke a corresponding emotional reaction from the user. There are plenty more examples out there and a lot more to come. The point is we're just at the start of this creative tech future where people that in previous generations might have pursued music or film are putting their energy into technology. I just want to leave you with this last thought. While this demo app was shared mostly as a joke, I truly believe this is where the future of culture is headed. Soon it won't just be the band t-shirt you're wearing or the album that you're listening to that defines your cultural identity. It'll be the apps that you have on your phone. Technology is no longer just a tool, it's the lens through which we see the world and each other. So it should come as no surprise then that apps, not albums, are becoming today's dominant cultural markers. Music will never die, but it's no longer where our cultural futures will be built. I'm definitely personally saddened by music's declining influence, but I'm at least partially excited to see where this new creative energy leads us next. If you think I'm totally wrong and off base, feel free to jump into the comments and let me know what I missed. And if you're building some cool Sentimental software, I'd love to check it out and support. So hit me up in the comments, find me on Twitter, I'd love to see what you're up to. Until next time. What is happening? Hey, stop flickering. Nope. God damn. So much fucking noise today. Technology for distribution. God damn it. So many fucking planes. Everything sucks. Everyone makes noise and I hate it. God damn it. I don't understand who's texting me. Good enough. Wow. I think I'm almost done. Maybe one more. Let's fucking do this.